The morning sun filtered through the ancient live oaks of Riverside Park in Charleston, South Carolina, casting dappled shadows on the walking paths. It was the kind of perfect spring morning that made you believe in second chances. The air crisp with the salt smell of the nearby harbor, the azaleas blooming in violent pinks and whites, and the gentle sound of joggers' feet hitting the packed dirt trail. Major Elena Cross sat in her custom-built wheelchair at the edge of the duck pond, her sketch pad balanced on the specialized lap desk. At 52, she had the bearing of someone who had commanded respect long before she'd been confined to wheels. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and her hands, scarred from shrapnel but still steady, moved with practiced precision as she captured the morning light on water. Beside her, lying in a perfect sphinx position, was Sergeant. That's what she called him. Not Sarge or any cute nickname, just Sergeant. He was a 95-pound German shepherd with a coat the color of burnt umber and eyes that held the same 1,000-yard stare Elena had seen in her own mirror. He wore a vest that read "Service Animal" in bold letters, though anyone who knew anything about military working dogs could see he was far more than that. Sergeant had been her partner during her final deployment to Kandahar. He'd detected IEDs, guarded her tent, and on one blood-soaked afternoon, when her convoy hit a roadside bomb, he'd dragged her, both legs shattered, 30 yards to cover, while bullets kicked up dirt around them. The dog had saved her life. When they medically retired her and gave her the option to adopt him, it wasn't even a question. Now, 3 years after the blast, Sergeant was her constant companion. He opened doors, retrieved dropped items, and most importantly, he sensed her panic attacks before they hit, pressing his weight against her lap until the storm passed. He was her anchor in a world that had gone sideways. Elena paused her sketching, reaching down to scratch behind Sergeant's ear. The dog's tail gave a single content thump against the grass. "Good boy," she murmured. "Just a few more minutes, then we'll head home." She was working on a commissioned piece, a series of Charleston waterfront scenes for a gallery on King Street. The extra income helped supplement her military pension, though money was always tight. The VA had fought her on disability ratings for 2 years, and the medical bills from her ongoing physical therapy never seemed to end. But here, in this moment, with the sun warm on her shoulders and Sergeant vigilant at her side, Elena felt something close to peace. She'd learned to treasure these moments, knowing from hard experience how quickly they could shatter. The peace lasted exactly 7 more minutes. CTA number 1. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching. From, I love hearing from you. She heard them before she saw them. The bass, heavy thump of expensive car speakers, loud enough to rattle windows. A metallic silver BMW convertible, the kind that cost more than she made in 3 years, pulled into the park's small lot with aggressive carelessness, taking up 2 spots. 3 teenage boys spilled out, laughing with the particular cruelty of young men who'd never been told no. The driver was tall and blond, wearing a polo shirt with a popped collar and boat shoes without socks, the uniform of Charleston's elite prep school crowd. His 2 friends, equally polished and smug, flanked him like an entourage. Elena recognized the type immediately. She had dealt with officers' sons at the base, kids who thought their father's rank gave them immunity. These boys had that same entitled swagger, that same dangerous combination of privilege and boredom. Sergeant's ears pricked forward. his body shifting from relaxed to alert. Elena felt the change in him, a subtle stiffening, a low, almost inaudible growl rumbling in his chest. The dog was reading something in their body language, their energy. He'd been trained to detect threats, and every instinct he possessed was now firing. "Easy," Elena murmured, her hand resting on his head. "Just ignore them." But the boys weren't the type to be ignored. They walked past the other families, the elderly couple feeding the ducks, the young mother with her stroller, and headed straight toward Elena. The blond one, who carried himself like a ringleader, spotted Sergeant first. His face lit up with a particular kind of malicious interest. "Yo, check out the attack dog," he said to his friends, his voice carrying across the quiet park. Elena kept her eyes on her sketch, her jaw tightening. "Stay calm," she told herself. "They'll get bored and leave." The boys stopped about 10 feet away. "That thing looks mean," said one of them, a stocky kid with a red vineyard vines cap. "You sure it's safe?" Elena looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "He's a service animal," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded soldiers. "And yes, he's perfectly safe as long as he's not bothered." The blond boy's smile widened. He'd heard the firmness in her voice, the implied warning, and it had the opposite effect she'd intended. It made her interesting, made her a challenge. "Service animal?" he repeated, taking a step closer. "What service does it do? Fetch your wheelchair?" His friends laughed. Not genuine amusement, but the performative laughter of boys who knew they were supposed to find their leader funny. Elena felt the familiar burn of anger rising in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "Please move along. We're not bothering anyone." The blond boy looked at his friends, then back at her, his expression shifting. The cruel amusement was gone, replaced by something colder. He'd been dismissed, embarrassed in front of his pack, and his fragile ego couldn't handle it. "Move along," he said, his voice dropping. "You're in a public park, lady. I can stand wherever I want." Sergeant rose to his feet in one fluid motion, positioning himself between Elena and the boys. His hackles weren't raised yet, but his body language had shifted completely. This was no longer a pet. This was a trained military asset assessing a threat. The stocky friend stepped back. "Dude, that dog looks serious." "It's fine," the blonde interrupted, but his voice had an edge now. He was committed. To back down now would mean losing face, and that was apparently unthinkable. Elena felt her heart rate spike, that old combat instinct kicking in. She was reading the situation with the same tactical assessment she'd used in Kandahar. 3 hostiles, no cover, limited mobility on her part. Sergeant was her only force multiplier, but engaging meant risking him. "Look," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I don't want any trouble. Just let us be." The blond boy bent down, picking up a small rock. He tossed it casually in his hand, his eyes never leaving Sergeant. "What if I want to see what your service animal can do?" "Don't," Elena warned, her voice dropping into command register. It was the voice she'd used to lead convoys through hostile territory, and it made the other 2 boys freeze. But the blonde just smiled. And then with casual, deliberate cruelty, he threw the rock. The rock hit Sergeant square in the ribs with a dull, sickening thud. The dog yelped, a sharp, surprised cry of pain that cut through the peaceful morning like a knife. Everything happened in the space of 3 heartbeats. Sergeant spun, his training warring with his pain and protective instinct. He barked once, a deep, warning boom that made the stocky friend stumble backward. But he didn't lunge. Despite being struck, despite the provocation, the dog held his position. Years of discipline kept him from attacking without the command. Elena's hands flew to her wheels, but before she could move, the blond boy laughed, a high, cruel sound that held no humor. "Did you see that? Thing's a coward. You son of a—" Elena started, but her words were drowned out by the third boy, a lanky kid with acne scars who'd found his courage in his leader's bravado. "My turn," he said, and before Elena could react, he stepped forward and kicked. His sneaker connected with Sergeant's ribs in the same spot the rock had hit. The dog went down with a strangled whimper, his legs collapsing under him. "No!" Elena screamed, the sound ripping from her throat with such force that several people across the park turned to look. She lunged forward in her wheelchair, but the blonde stepped behind her, his hands gripping the handles. "Watch," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "Watch what happens when people like you think you can talk back to people like me." He held the wheelchair in place, his grip iron strong, while his friend drew his foot back for another kick. Sergeant was trying to get up, trying to crawl toward Elena, but the wind had been knocked from him. Elena thrashed against the handles, her hands clawing at the boy's grip, but without the use of her legs, without leverage, she was helpless. Absolutely, completely helpless. And that helplessness, that inability to protect the one being who had protected her through hell, broke something fundamental inside her. "Stop! Someone help!" she screamed toward the other park visitors. The elderly couple by the pond were staring, frozen in shock. The young mother had grabbed her stroller and was hurrying away, her face pale. A jogger stopped, pulled out his phone, hesitated, and kept running. Nobody was coming. Nobody was going to help. The lanky kid kicked again, this time catching Sergeant in the shoulder. The dog's yelp turned into a high-pitched keening sound that tore at Elena's heart. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "That's enough," the stocky friend said, his voice uncertain. "Come on, let's just—" "Shut up," the blonde snapped. "She needs to learn her place." He released the wheelchair and walked around to face Elena. His hand shot out, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her head back. She tried to swing at him, but he caught her wrist easily, twisting it until tears sprang to her eyes. "You're nobody," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You're a broken old woman with a broken old dog, and you're going to sit here and watch while we—" The voice that cut through the morning air was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried with it a weight that made everyone freeze. "Take your hand off my mother." The blond boy turned, releasing Elena's hair, his expression shifting from cruelty to confusion. Standing on the path, maybe 15 feet away, was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as the park's war memorial. He was tall, 6'2", easy, with shoulders that spoke of years of functional strength training. His dark hair was cut high and tight, military precision. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and running shorts, but something about the way he stood, the way he held himself with absolute stillness, marked him as dangerous. His eyes, gray like a winter sea, fixed on the blond boy with an intensity that made the teenager take an involuntary step back. "Marcus," Elena breathed, her voice breaking. She hadn't seen her son in 8 months. He'd been deployed somewhere he couldn't tell her about, doing things she'd learned not to ask about. But here he was, like some avenging angel materialized from her desperate prayers. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Cross, U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6, took 3 measured steps forward. His eyes never left the blond boy, but his peripheral vision was capturing everything. The other 2 teenagers spreading out slightly, the distance to his mother, sergeants, labored breathing on the ground. "This your mom?" the blonde asked, trying to inject mockery into his voice, but it came out thinner than intended. Something about the way this man moved, the cold calculation in his eyes, was triggering every prey instinct the boy had. Marcus didn't answer the question. Instead, in that same quiet, conversational tone, he said, "You have 3 seconds to step away from her. Then I'm going to make you." The blond boy's face flushed red. His friends had seen him back down to the old woman. If he backed down to her son too, his reputation at the prep school would be destroyed. Pride, ego, and teenage stupidity made the decision for him. "Or what?" he sneered, taking a step forward. "You'll—" He never finished the sentence. Marcus moved. There was no wind-up, no warning. One moment he was standing 15 feet away. The next, he was inside the blond boy's guard, his hand locked around the teenager's extended wrist in an iron grip. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. But Elena, who had seen combat, who understood violence, saw it break down into distinct, brutal movements. Marcus's grip twisted the boy's wrist into a lock that made him cry out. While the teenager was distracted by the pain, Marcus's other hand shot up, thumb pressing into the pressure point just below the jaw. The boy's knees buckled. Marcus controlled the descent, guiding him down to the ground face first with clinical precision. He placed one knee between the shoulder blades, maintaining the wrist lock, and held the boy completely immobile. The whole thing, from first contact to the boy eating dirt, was 2 seconds, maybe less. "Stay down," Marcus said quietly. There was no anger in his voice, no emotion at all. It was a simple statement of fact. The stocky friend in the vineyard vine's cap stepped forward, his fists raised in some approximation of a fighting stance he'd probably learned from YouTube. "Get off him, you—" Marcus looked up, and whatever the stocky kid saw in those gray eyes made him freeze mid-step. "You really want to do this?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity. The kid's raised fists slowly lowered. He took a step back, then another. This is assault," he stammered. "My dad's a lawyer. Your dad's a lawyer?" Marcus repeated, still holding the blond boy pinned. "Good. He can explain to the police why you 3 were assaulting a disabled veteran and her certified service animal in a public park." He looked at the lanky kid, who had frozen mid-kick when Marcus appeared. "You, with the Nikes, come here." The lanky teenager shook his head rapidly, tears beginning to stream down his face. "I didn't. I saw what you did," Marcus said, his voice dropping even quieter. "I watched you kick a defenseless animal. Twice." He shifted his weight slightly, causing the blond boy to gasp in pain. "And you," he addressed his captive, "you held my mother while your friends beat her dog." For the first time, real emotion cracked through Marcus's controlled exterior, a flash of pure, cold fury that made all 3 boys flinch. "Do you have any idea what that dog has done? What he's earned?" The blonde wheezed out something that might have been an apology, might have been a protest. Marcus leaned down, his mouth close to the boy's ear. "That dog pulled my mother, who had just lost both legs to an IED, to safety while insurgents were shooting at them. He saved her life in a place you couldn't find on a map. And you." His grip tightened infinitesimally. "You kicked him for entertainment." In the distance, Elena heard sirens. Someone had called the police. Good. Let them come. Marcus heard them too. Without releasing his hold, he pulled out his phone with his free hand, navigated one-handed to his camera, and took several photographs, the boy on the ground, the other two standing there, Sergeant's injuries visible in the grass, Elena's disheveled appearance. "Smart," Elena said, finding her voice. Her hands were shaking with adrenaline, but her training was reasserting itself. "Document everything." Marcus nodded, still not looking away from his captive. "Mom, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said, though her wrist throbbed where the blonde had twisted it. "But Sergeant, Marcus, they kicked him multiple times. He's bleeding." For a fraction of a second, Marcus's jaw tightened. Then he released the blonde boy, but not before leaning down one last time. "If you move before the police get here, I will find you. Do you understand me?" The boy nodded frantically, curling into a ball on the ground. Marcus crossed to Sergeant in 3 long strides. The dog was conscious, trying to get up. His breathing labored. Marcus knelt beside him, his hands, so brutally efficient moments ago, now infinitely gentle as they probed the dog's ribs. "Easy, Sarge. Easy, buddy," Marcus murmured. "I got you. You're okay." The dog whined, but his tail gave a weak thump of recognition. He remembered Marcus from before the deployment, from when Marcus would visit home on leave and they'd run the beach together. 2 police cruisers pulled into the lot, lights flashing. 4 officers emerged, hands on their weapons, assessing the scene. A man kneeling beside a dog, 3 teenagers in various states of distress, a woman in a wheelchair with tears streaming down her face. The lead officer, a sergeant with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen everything, took in the scene with practiced efficiency. His gaze lingered on Marcus's military bearing, the way he held himself, the calculated calm. "Someone want to tell me what happened here?" the sergeant asked. The blond boy was fastest, scrambling to his feet, his voice taking on the entitled, aggrieved tone of someone who'd been taught that his version of reality was the only one that mattered. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man attacked me. I was just walking through the park and he—" "That's interesting," Elena interrupted, her voice cutting through his protest with the authority of someone who'd commanded combat units. "Because what I saw was you and your friends assault my service dog, hold my wheelchair to prevent me from helping him, and physically restrain me while they beat him." She pulled out her phone, her hands steadier now. "And I have video. I started recording the moment they approached us." The blond boy's face went sheet white. Marcus stood up slowly, his military ID already in his hand. He held it out to the police sergeant. "Lieutenant Commander Marcus Cross, U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6. I'm on leave visiting my mother. I witnessed these 3 individuals assault a disabled veteran and her certified service animal. My mother has video evidence. I have photographs. And," he gestured to the elderly couple who were still standing by the pond, the young mother who had returned when she saw the police, "there are multiple witnesses." The police sergeant's expression shifted as he examined the ID. His eyes flicked to Elena, taking in her wheelchair, the service animal vest on the injured dog, the protective stance of her son. He turned to his officers. "Separate these 3. I want statements from each of them individually, and get animal control here. That dog needs immediate medical attention." As the officers moved to comply, the sergeant looked at Marcus. "You restrained him?" He nodded at the blond boy, who now had a young officer standing over him. "I used minimum necessary force to prevent further assault on my mother and her service animal," Marcus said, his voice professional, clipped. I applied a wrist lock and controlled him to the ground. I did not strike him, choke him, or use any force beyond what was required to neutralize the immediate threat. The sergeant nodded slowly. Uh-huh. And you just happen to know how to do that? Occupational skill, Marcus said flatly. A faint smile tugged at the sergeant's mouth. I bet. He looked at Elena. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see that video. Elena handed over her phone. The sergeant watched the footage, his expression growing darker with each second. The audio was clear. The blond boy's taunts, the sounds of the kicks landing, Elena's screams for help, Sergeant's yelps of pain. When the video ended, the sergeant looked at the three teenagers with something close to disgust. You're all under arrest for assault, animal cruelty, and battery. You, he pointed at the blonde, also get a special charge for assault on a disabled person. Wait, no, the blonde protested. Do you know who my father is? The sergeant's expression didn't change. I don't care if your father is the governor. You assaulted a combat veteran and her service dog, on video. He nodded to his officers. Cuff them. As the handcuffs clicked shut, the blond boy looked at Marcus with pure hatred. This isn't over, he spat. My family has money. We have connections. Marcus took 2 steps forward. He didn't touch the boy, didn't threaten him, just looked at him with those cold gray eyes. I've faced Taliban fighters in caves. I've been shot at by trained soldiers. You think I'm scared of your daddy's lawyer? He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that only the blonde could hear. But here's what you need to understand. You didn't just hurt a dog today. You hurt a combat veteran. You hurt my mother. And that means you've made an enemy of the United States Navy SEAL teams. We don't forget, we don't forgive, and we never, ever quit. He straightened up, his voice returning to normal volume. See you in court. The officers led the 3 teenagers away. The blonde was no longer talking, no longer threatening. He was just a scared kid who'd finally realized there were consequences to his actions. After the police left, Marcus gently lifted Sergeant into his arms. The dog whimpered but didn't struggle, seeming to understand that help had arrived. Elena wheeled alongside them as they made their way to Marcus's truck parked nearby. We need to get him to an emergency vet, Marcus said, his jaw tight. Now. Elena nodded, already pulling up the nearest 24-hour animal hospital on her phone. Her hands were still shaking, but the familiar rhythm of mission planning was helping her focus. Objective, save Sergeant. Everything else could wait. As Marcus carefully placed Sergeant in the back seat, the dog looked up at Elena with those intelligent brown eyes. Despite his pain, despite his injuries, his tail gave one weak thump. He was still trying to reassure her. You're going to be okay, buddy, Elena whispered, reaching back to rest her hand on his head. You're going to be okay. But as they pulled out of the parking lot, she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince the dog or herself. Part 4. Aftermath and Justice. The emergency vet clinic smelled of antiseptic and fear, the particular scent of a place where beloved animals came to fight for their lives. Marcus carried Sergeant through the doors himself, the 95-pound dog cradled in his arms like he weighed nothing. Elena wheeled alongside them, her phone already out, filming everything with shaking hands. Document it all, Marcus had told her on the drive over. Every injury, every x-ray, every bill. They're going to try to minimize this. We need evidence that withstands their lawyers. Dr. Sarah Chen, a young veterinarian with kind eyes and steady hands, met them at the intake desk. She took one look at Sargent's labored breathing and the blood at the corner of his mouth, and her expression hardened. "What happened?" she asked, already moving toward the surgical suite. "3 teenagers kicked him," Elena said, her voice breaking. "Multiple times. He's a certified service animal. He's a military working dog veteran. We'll take care of him," Dr. Chen interrupted gently, placing a hand on Elena's shoulder. "I promise." Marcus gave the vet a quick rundown of the visible injuries: the kicks to the ribs, the shoulder, the approximate time since the attack. His voice was clinical, detached, but Elena knew her son well enough to see the fury burning beneath that calm exterior. Dr. Chen listened, nodded, and gestured to her technicians. They moved with practiced efficiency, transferring Sargent to a gurney, starting an IV, wheeling him toward the back. The dog's eyes never left Elena until the doors swung shut. 2 hours later, they sat in the waiting room. Marcus had changed from his running clothes into jeans and a button-down shirt he kept in his truck, but he still radiated that coiled tension, that readiness for violence that Elena recognized from her own combat days. "You didn't have to come home," Elena said quietly. "You're supposed to be on leave, relaxing, not—" "I was running in the park when I saw them surrounding you," Marcus said, his voice tight. "I saw the blonde one grab your wheelchair. I was maybe 40 yards away." He looked at his hands. "If I'd been 30 seconds later—" "But you weren't," Elena said firmly. "You were there, like always." She reached over and took his hand. It was a large hand, scarred from 100 small injuries, calloused from years of hard training, but it was gentle when it closed around hers. They sat in silence until Dr. Chen emerged, still in her surgical scrubs. Her expression was serious but not grave. "He's stable," she said, and Elena felt the knot in her chest finally loosen. 3 broken ribs, severe bruising to his organs, and internal bleeding that we had to surgically address. If you'd waited even an hour longer—" She trailed off. "But he's going to make it. He's tough." "Can we see him?" Elena asked. Dr. Chen nodded. "He's in recovery. He's pretty groggy from the anesthesia, but yes." Sargent was lying in a large recovery kennel, his torso wrapped in white bandages, an IV line running into his leg. His eyes were half closed, but when Elena wheeled close and called his name softly, they opened. His tail gave a weak thump. "Hey, buddy," Elena whispered, reaching through the bars to rest her hand on his head. "You're okay. You're going to be okay." The dog's tail thumped again, stronger this time. Marcus knelt beside the kennel. "You did good, Sarge. You protected her. That's all that matters." Dr. Chen handed Elena an itemized bill. "I'm required to give you this, but I want you to know. I'm willing to testify in court about his injuries. I've worked with service animals for 10 years. This kind of damage doesn't come from an accident. This is deliberate, repeated trauma." Marcus took the bill, his jaw tightening as he scanned the numbers. $8,400 for emergency surgery, plus medications, recovery care. He looked up. "They're going to pay every penny of this." "Marcus, we can't prove—" Elena started. "We have video. We have witnesses. We have documentation." Marcus's voice was steel. "They're not getting away with this, Mom. I promise you that." The next morning, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number with a 212 area code, New York. He answered, putting it on speaker so Elena could hear. "Mr. Cross?" The voice was smooth, cultured, with the practiced confidence of expensive legal education. "My name is Jonathan Whitmore. I represent the Beaumont family. specifically their son Trey, who was involved in the unfortunate incident yesterday. Unfortunate incident, Marcus repeated flatly. Yes, well, Whitmore continued, the Beaumonts are a prominent Charleston family. Mr. Beaumont Sr. is a respected businessman and philanthropist. They're deeply concerned about this matter and would like to resolve it quietly. Resolve it how? Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The family is prepared to cover all veterinary expenses, of course. Additionally, they would like to offer your mother $50,000 as a gesture of goodwill. In exchange, they would ask that you and your mother sign a non-disclosure agreement and decline to pursue any further legal action or speak to the media about this matter. Elena made a sound of disgust. Marcus held up a hand, his expression cold. Let me make sure I understand this, Marcus said. You want us to take money and stay quiet about the fact that 3 privileged teenagers assaulted a disabled combat veteran and nearly beat her service dog to death. Those are inflammatory terms, Mr. Cross. The boys made a mistake. They're young. Mr. Beaumont believes this shouldn't ruin their futures. Here's what I believe, Marcus interrupted. I believe your client raised a sociopath. I believe that sociopath committed multiple felonies on video, and I believe that if we accept your money and shut up, he'll do it again to someone else who can't fight back. Mr. Cross, please understand, the Beaumonts have significant resources. If this goes to trial, they can make it very expensive for you, very drawn out. The stress on your mother, is that a threat? Marcus's voice dropped even lower. Because if you're threatening my mother, you should know something. I've spent the last 12 years learning how to deal with threats. I'm very, very good at it. A pause on the other end. That sounds like a threat, Mr. Cross. No, it's a promise. We're going to court. We're going to play that video for a jury. And we're going to make sure your client's son learns that money doesn't buy immunity from consequences. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go visit my mother's service dog, the one your client's son nearly killed. He hung up. Elena was staring at him, a fierce pride in her eyes. They're going to make this hell, you know. Drag it out. Use every trick their lawyers know. Let them try, Marcus said. I've survived worse. He looked at his mother, and so have you. CTA Number 2. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty. Over the next 3 months, the legal battle unfolded exactly as Marcus had predicted. The Beaumonts hired a team of high-powered attorneys from one of Charleston's most prestigious firms. They filed motion after motion, trying to suppress the video evidence, arguing that Marcus had used excessive force in restraining Trey, claiming that Sargent had acted aggressively first. But Marcus wasn't fighting alone. Word of the case had spread through the veteran community like wildfire. Within a week, Elena and Marcus had received offers of support from dozens of organizations. Veteran advocacy groups, service dog nonprofits, even a pro bono legal clinic specifically for disabled vets. The clinic connected them with Patricia Morales, a fierce attorney in her 60s who had built her career defending veterans' rights. She took one look at the video, read Dr. Chen's medical report, and smiled like a shark scenting blood. They picked the wrong family to mess with, Patricia said at their first meeting. A disabled combat veteran, a SEAL, and a military working dog. The optics alone will destroy them, but we're not relying on optics. We're going to bury them in facts. Patricia was true to her word. She deposed every witness at the park that day. She obtained Sargent's complete military service record, which detailed his deployments, his awards, the missions where he'd saved lives. She worked with Dr. Chen to create a detailed medical timeline showing exactly how much force had been used and what the long-term impacts on Sargent's health might be. And then she did something brilliant. She filed a motion to have the case tried in federal court under a law protecting veterans with disabilities from targeted harassment and assault. The Beaumonts' lawyers fought it, but federal jurisdiction was granted. Suddenly, this wasn't just a local case that the Beaumonts could pressure and influence. It was in the federal system, with a judge who had no connection to Charleston's social circles. The trial began on a humid June morning. The federal courthouse in Charleston was an imposing building of white columns and marble, designed to inspire respect for the law. Elena wheeled up the accessibility ramp with Marcus beside her, and Sargent, now fully recovered, wearing his service vest, walking calmly at her side. A crowd had gathered. Local media crews, dozens of veterans in their uniforms or military caps, and ordinary citizens who had heard about the case and wanted to show support. As Elena approached, the veterans formed two lines creating a path to the courthouse doors. As she passed between them, each one saluted. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She'd served for 20 years, but she'd never felt more honored, more seen than in this moment. Inside the courtroom, the contrast was stark. On one side sat Elena, Marcus, Patricia, and a gallery filled with veterans and supporters. On the other side sat the three teenage boys with their parents, flanked by 5 expensive lawyers in suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Trey Beaumont looked different from the arrogant boy in the park. His blonde hair was cut conservatively. He wore a somber suit, and he kept his eyes downcast. His lawyers had clearly coached him on how to appear contrite. But when Marcus walked in, wearing his dress blue uniform, his chest heavy with ribbons including 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, and the Navy and Marine Corps medal, the entire courtroom fell silent. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone told a story. The trial lasted 5 days. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. First, they played the video. The courtroom watched in silence as Trey mocked Elena, as the lanky friend kicked Sargent, as Trey grabbed Elena's hair and twisted her wrist. 2 jurors were visibly crying by the end. One of Trey's own attorneys looked sick. Next, Dr. Chen took the stand. She brought x-rays, surgical photos, and spoke in clinical detail about the level of force required to cause Sargent's injuries. She explained that the pattern of trauma was consistent with multiple deliberate strikes, not accidental contact. In my professional opinion, Dr. Chen said, looking directly at the jury, if this dog had not received emergency surgery within the time frame he did, he would have died from internal bleeding. These boys didn't just hurt him, they nearly killed him. The defense tried to suggest that Sargent might have been injured before the incident, that the video didn't show the full context, that the boys had been frightened by what they perceived as an aggressive animal. Patricia destroyed each argument systematically. She presented Sargent's veterinary record showing he'd had a clean bill of health at his checkup 2 weeks before. She called the elderly couple from the park who testified that Sargent had been lying calmly beside Elena until the boys approached. She even called a K-9 training expert who explained that Sargent's behavior, not lunging despite being struck, showed extraordinary discipline and training. Then Marcus took the stand. He walked to the witness box with military precision and was sworn in. Patricia began with the basics: his background, his service record, his relationship with his mother. "Lieutenant Commander Cross, can you explain to the jury what a military working dog does?" Patricia asked. "Military working dogs are trained to detect explosives, track enemy combatants, and protect their handlers in combat situations," Marcus said, his voice clear and steady. "They're not pets. They're highly specialized equipment that takes years to train. More importantly, they're partners. They go into danger alongside soldiers and they save lives." "Can you tell us about Sergeant's service record?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Sergeant deployed 3 times to Afghanistan. He detected 17 IEDs before they could detonate, saving an estimated 50 to 70 American lives. He was awarded the Dickin Medal, which is essentially the animal equivalent of the Medal of Honor." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several jurors were taking notes. "And can you tell us what Sergeant did for your mother specifically?" Patricia asked. "On March 15, 2022, my mother's convoy was hit by a roadside bomb. Both of her legs were shattered. She was trapped in the vehicle, taking fire from enemy positions approximately 100 meters away." Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched. "Sergeant pulled her from the vehicle and dragged her to cover. He then positioned himself between my mother and the incoming fire, not moving until the rescue team arrived. He was shot in the process, took a round through his left ear, but he never left her side." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "So, when you saw these 3 young men kicking Sergeant in the park, what went through your mind?" "I saw cowards attacking a hero," Marcus said, his gray eyes hard. "I saw entitled children hurting a combat veteran, both my mother and her dog, for entertainment, and I knew I had to stop it." The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Henderson, approached for cross-examination. "Lieutenant Commander Cross, isn't it true that you used military combat techniques on my client, that you applied what amounts to a military-grade restraint?" "I used the minimum force necessary to stop an ongoing assault," Marcus replied calmly. "But you're trained to kill people, aren't you?" "I'm trained to protect people," Marcus corrected. "If I'd wanted to hurt your client, he'd be in a hospital, not a courtroom." "But you were angry, weren't you? You saw your mother in distress and you lost control." "No, sir." Marcus's voice was flat. "I maintained complete control. I applied a basic wrist lock and took your client to the ground without striking him, without choking him, without causing any lasting injury. Any police officer in this country is trained to do the same thing. I simply did it faster." Henderson tried several more angles, but Marcus was unshakable. His military bearing, his clear testimony, his obvious credibility with the jury, it was all working against the defense. Finally, the defense made their critical error. They put Trey Beaumont on the stand. Trey had been coached extensively. He wore a conservative suit, spoke in a carefully modulated voice, and expressed elaborate remorse for his actions. "I made a terrible mistake," Trey said, his eyes downcast. "I was trying to show off for my friends. I didn't understand that the dog was a service animal. I deeply regret my actions." Patricia stood for cross-examination. She was calm, almost gentle at first. "Mr. Beaumont, you testified that you didn't understand Sergeant was a service animal. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "Even though he was wearing a vest that said 'service animal' in large letters?" Trey hesitated. I didn't see the vest." Patricia pulled out a blown-up screenshot from the video. "This is from your own cell phone, Mr. Beaumont. Your friend took this picture right before the incident. Can you see the vest in this photo?" The vest was clearly visible, the words "service animal" unmistakable. Yes. And you testified that you were trying to show off. Show off what, exactly? I don't know. I was being stupid. Were you showing off your ability to hurt things weaker than you? Your ability to make a disabled woman watch while you beat her dog? Objection. Henderson was on his feet. Sustained, the judge said. Rephrase, counselor. Patricia nodded. Mr. Beaumont, when you grabbed Major Cross's hair and twisted her wrist, what were you trying to accomplish? Trey's carefully constructed facade was cracking. I was just trying to. Trying to what? Hurt her? Humiliate her? Teach her a lesson for daring to speak to you? She was rude to me. The words burst out before Trey could stop them. The courtroom erupted. Henderson closed his eyes. Trey's father, sitting in the gallery, put his head in his hands. Patricia pressed forward. She was rude. A disabled combat veteran in a public park was rude to you, and that justified physical assault in your mind? I didn't mean it like that. What did you mean, Mr. Beaumont? Please, explain to this jury what justifies kicking a service dog multiple times. What justifies holding a disabled woman's wheelchair so she can't escape while your friends beat her dog? I thought she was being dramatic, Trey shouted, his face flushed with anger. She was sitting there like she owned the park, acting all high and mighty because she has some stupid vest on her dog. Stupid vest? Patricia's voice went quiet. Are you referring to the vest that identifies him as a decorated military combat veteran? The damage was done. Trey had revealed exactly what everyone suspected. He was an entitled child who viewed anyone he perceived as beneath him with contempt, and who believed his money and status gave him the right to hurt them. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They found all 3 boys guilty on all counts: assault, battery, animal cruelty, and assault on a disabled person. When the verdicts were read, Elena gripped Marcus's hand. Sergeant, lying at her feet, thumped his tail as if he understood. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair, looked at the 3 defendants with unconcealed disgust. I have presided over thousands of cases, she said. I have seen violence born of poverty, of desperation, of mental illness, but I have rarely seen violence born of pure cruelty and entitlement, as I have seen in this case. She looked at Trey. Mr. Beaumont, you didn't just attack a dog. You attacked a combat veteran. You attacked a disabled American hero. And you did it because she dared to assert her right to exist peacefully in a public space. She sentenced Trey to 2 years in a juvenile detention facility, followed by 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service at veterans' hospitals, and a permanent criminal record. His 2 friends received similar sentences, though slightly reduced given their lesser roles. The civil suit that followed resulted in a judgment of $200,000, far more than the Beaumonts had offered to make the incident go away. The money went to Elena's medical bills, Sergeant's ongoing veterinary care, and a substantial donation to Puppies Behind Bars, a program that trains service dogs for veterans. But Marcus didn't stop there. 6 months after the trial, Marcus stood in front of the Charleston City Council, addressing a room packed with veterans, their families, and service dog handlers from across the state. I'm here today to propose an ordinance, Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. We're calling it Sergeant's Law. He clicked to the next slide in his presentation. Currently, assaulting a service animal is a misdemeanor in South Carolina, with penalties that rarely amount to more than a fine. This ordinance would upgrade attacks on service animals, particularly those serving disabled veterans, to a felony with mandatory jail time and substantial fines. Another slide. Additionally, it would require that anyone convicted of such an assault complete mandatory community service at veterans' facilities and undergo education about the critical role these animals play in veterans' lives. He paused, looking out at the faces watching him. These dogs aren't pets. They're medical equipment. They're combat veterans themselves. They save lives, not once, but every single day they serve. They deserve protection under the law. In the front row, Elena sat with Sergeant at her side. The dog had recovered fully, though he now had a slight limp when he walked for long distances. He wore a new vest, this one reading Combat Veteran in addition to Service Animal. Behind them, filling the gallery, were hundreds of people. Veterans in uniform, service dog handlers, disability rights advocates, and ordinary citizens who had followed the case and wanted to show their support. Some had driven hours to be there. The council voted unanimously to pass Sergeant's Law. Within a year, similar legislation had been introduced in 12 other states. Within 2 years, a federal version was working its way through Congress. But for Marcus and Elena, the real victory was quieter, more personal. It came on a Sunday morning, 4 weeks after the council vote. They were back at Riverside Park, the same park where everything had happened. Marcus had extended his leave, unable to bring himself to redeploy while his mother still bore the psychological scars of the attack. They sat by the duck pond in the early light. Sergeant was off-leash, something Elena had been too afraid to do since the attack, and was sniffing around the reeds, tail wagging, looking more like a regular dog than a combat veteran. "I never thanked you properly," Elena said, watching the dog. Marcus looked at his mother. "For what?" "For being there, for fighting for us, for making sure those boys didn't just get away with it." Her voice was thick with emotion. "For showing me that even when I can't protect myself anymore, I'm not alone." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "You taught me what service means, Mom. You spent 20 years in uniform. You gave your legs defending this country. You earned the right to be protected, to be defended." He looked at her. "That's what being a warrior means. It's not just about who you fight against. It's about who you fight for." Elena reached over and took his hand. They sat like that for a while, two veterans who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer, watching a dog chase ducks in the morning light. After a few minutes, Elena spoke again. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not the physical pain, not even the fear." "What was it?" Marcus asked. "The helplessness, being restrained, unable to protect the one being who had protected me through everything. Knowing that I was supposed to be the warrior, the soldier, and I couldn't even defend my own dog." She swallowed hard. "That's what broke me." Marcus squeezed her hand. "You defended him the way that mattered most. You got justice. You didn't let them buy their way out. You stood up in court and told the truth. That took more courage than anything I've done in combat, Mom. Real courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." Elena smiled, wiping her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." Sergeant trotted back over, his tongue lolling out in a doggy grin. He plopped down between their chairs with a satisfied grunt, one eye on the ducks, the other on Elena. Marcus looked at the dog who had saved his mother's life in Afghanistan, who had been beaten for defending her at home, who had survived and healed and was now just being a dog, happy, safe, "You know what I realized," Marcus said. "Those boys, they thought power meant being able to hurt someone weaker than them. They thought having money, having connections meant they could do whatever they wanted." "And," Elena prompted, "real power is being strong enough to protect those who can't protect themselves. Real power is using your strength to serve something bigger than yourself." He scratched behind Sargent's ears. "That's what you taught me. That's what you and Sargent represent." Elena nodded slowly. "Service over self. Service over self," Marcus echoed. It was the SEAL motto, but it was also the principle that had guided Elena's entire military career, the code that Sargent lived by every day. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over Charleston. The park was filling up with the Sunday morning crowd. Families, joggers, people walking their dogs. A young family walked past, parents and two small children. The kids spotted Sargent and their eyes went wide with excitement. "Can we pet the doggy?" the little girl asked, already reaching out. Her mother caught her hand. "Honey, that's a service dog. We can't." Elena smiled. "It's okay. He's off duty right now." She looked at the kids. "But you have to be gentle, okay? He's a veteran. He's been through a lot." The children approached carefully, their small hands gentle as they petted Sargent's head. The dog's tail thumped steadily against the ground, and he gave the little girl's face a careful lick that made her giggle. "What's his name?" the boy asked. "Sargent," Elena said. "He was a soldier, just like me. He saved my life." The children's eyes went even wider. "A hero dog," the girl breathed. "Yes," Marcus said, his voice soft. "A hero dog." The family moved on, the children looking back at Sargent with awe. Elena watched them go, and for the first time since the attack, she felt something close to peace settling into her bones. "You gonna be okay when I redeploy?" Marcus asked quietly. He'd already extended his leave twice, but eventually he'd have to return to his team. Elena looked at Sargent, at the park full of people, at the morning light dancing on the duck pond. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, I think I will be." "You've got Sargent." "I've got Sargent," she agreed. "And I've got this." She gestured around them, the park, the community, the world that had rallied around them. "I've got the knowledge that there are good people out there, that justice still exists, that cowards like those boys don't win." Marcus nodded. "You've also got my phone number, and my team's phone numbers, and about 50 different veteran organizations who've asked me to check on you." Elena laughed. "I'm going to be fine, Marcus, really." And she meant it. The attack had broken something in her, yes, but the aftermath, the trial, the support, the victory had rebuilt her stronger. She wasn't the same person who'd been sitting at this pond 6 months ago. She was harder in some ways, softer in others, but fundamentally more whole. A jogger ran past, then stopped, jogging back. He was in his 30s, wearing a Marines t-shirt. "Excuse me," he said, a little breathless. "Are you Major Cross?" Elena nodded, surprised. "I saw you on the news. The trial." He looked at Sargent, then at Marcus in his civilian clothes, recognizing him too. "I just wanted to say thank you for fighting back, for standing up. My sister has a service dog, PTSD from her deployment, and after your case, people treat her dog with more respect. They think twice before being assholes." He gave them a quick salute and jogged off before Elena could respond. Marcus smiled. "See? You changed things, Mom. That's impact." Over the next hour, 3 more people stopped to thank Elena, a veteran with his own service dog, an elderly woman whose grandson had been helped by service dog legislation, a teenager who said the case had inspired her to volunteer at a veterans shelter. Each time, Elena felt another piece of herself heal. She'd spent so long feeling helpless, feeling like a victim. But she wasn't a victim. She was a warrior who had fought a different kind of battle and won. As the morning turned to afternoon, Marcus helped Elena with her art supplies. She was going to paint here again, reclaim this space, make it hers once more. "Before I forget," Marcus said, pulling an envelope from his pocket, "this came for you yesterday." Elena opened it. Inside was a letter on Official Department of Veterans Affairs letterhead. She read it once, then again, her eyes widening. They're awarding Sergeant the Animals in War and Peace Medal of Bravery," she said, her voice breaking. "It's a new award. They're creating it because of our case." Marcus grinned. "I may have had something to do with that. I know a guy who knows a guy." "Marcus, he earned it, Mom. Everything he's done. In Afghanistan and here protecting you. He earned it." Elena looked down at Sergeant, who was now lying in the grass, basking in the sun, completely oblivious to the honor being bestowed on him. To him, he'd just been doing his job, protecting his handler. That's all he'd ever done. "We're going to D.C. in 3 weeks, Marcus said. "There's going to be a ceremony at the Pentagon. Full honors. They want both of you there." Elena shook her head in wonder. 6 months ago, she'd been held captive in her wheelchair, forced to watch her best friend being beaten. Now, that same dog was being honored at the Pentagon. "Life's strange," she said. "Life's good," Marcus corrected, "when you fight for what's right." As they packed up to leave, Elena took one last look at the park. This place had been the site of her trauma, but it wasn't going to define her. She wasn't going to let 3 privileged teenagers take this away from her. She was coming back, next week and the week after that, and for as many weeks as she wanted. This was her park, her city, her life. She'd earned it through 20 years of service and sacrifice, and anyone who tried to take it from her again would learn the same lesson Trey Beaumont had learned. You don't mess with a combat veteran, and you definitely don't mess with her dog. Sergeant looked up at her as if sensing her thoughts, and his tail wagged. In his simple, direct way, he was telling her what he'd told her 100 times before. "I've got you. I'll always have you." "I know, buddy," Elena whispered, scratching his ears. "I know." Closing message. 3 weeks later, Elena and Marcus stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes. The room was filled with military brass, members of Congress, and dozens of service dog handlers from across the country. News cameras lined the walls, capturing everything. Sergeant sat at attention beside Elena's wheelchair, wearing a new collar for the occasion. He didn't understand the ceremony, but he understood duty, and right now his duty was to sit still and make his handler proud. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs approached with a blue velvet box. Inside was a medal, bronze with an embossed image of a dog standing guard, and the words, "Animals in War and Peace, Medal of Bravery." "Major Elena Cross," the Secretary said, his voice echoing in the Grand Hall. "It is my honor to present your partner, Sergeant, with the inaugural Animals in War and Peace Medal of Bravery, in recognition of his extraordinary service to our nation and his unwavering dedication to protecting those who cannot protect themselves." He bent down and carefully attached the medal to Sergeant's collar. The dog's tail wagged once, unsure why everyone was looking at him but happy to be with Elena. The room erupted in applause. Camera flashes went off. But Elena only had eyes for Sargent, her partner, her protector, her friend. After the ceremony, as they were leaving, a young girl approached. She was maybe 7 years old, with leg braces and a small golden retriever wearing a service dog vest. "Excuse me," the girl said shyly. "Is that Sargent, the famous dog?" Elena smiled. "Yes, this is Sargent. Can I pet him?" "Of course." The girl bent down carefully, her movements stiff because of her braces. Sargent remained still, patient, as she ran her hand over his head. "My dog is like him," she said. "He helps me walk. He keeps me safe." "Then you have a very special friend," Elena said. The girl nodded seriously. "My mommy said bad boys hurt Sargent, but he was okay, and the boys went to jail. Is that true?" "Yes, honey, that's true." "Good," the girl said with fierce satisfaction. "Nobody should hurt helper dogs. They're heroes." "Yes, they are," Elena agreed, her throat tight. The girl's mother collected her, thanking Elena profusely, and they walked away. Elena watched them go, the little girl moving slowly but confidently, her golden retriever matching her pace perfectly. "That's why we did it," Marcus said quietly, standing beside her. "Not for us, for them. So kids like that know they're protected. So service dogs are respected. So bullies learn there are consequences." Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. That evening, back in Charleston, they returned to Riverside Park one final time before Marcus had to redeploy. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The park was quiet, peaceful. Elena set up her easel and began to paint. Marcus sat on a nearby bench, watching. Sargent lay between them, his head resting on his paws, his new medal gleaming on his collar. "You know what I've learned through all of this?" Elena said, not looking up from her canvas. "What's that?" Marcus asked. "Strength isn't about not needing help. It's about accepting help when you need it. It's about building a community that has your back. It's about fighting for justice, even when it's hard." She paused, adding a stroke of gold to the sunset she was painting. "I spent so long thinking I had to be invincible, that asking for help was weakness. But the strongest thing I ever did was let you help me. Let Patricia help me. Let all those veterans and advocates stand with me." "You helped yourself, Mom," Marcus said. "You had the courage to fight back. We just made sure you didn't fight alone." As darkness fell, they packed up and headed home. Sargent walked between them, his gait steady and sure, his head high. Tomorrow, Marcus would leave for his next deployment. Tomorrow, Elena would begin another round of physical therapy. Tomorrow, life would continue with all its challenges and uncertainties. But tonight, they were together. They were safe, and they had won. Not just in court, but in every way that mattered. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it Sargent's loyalty, Marcus's protection, or the moment justice was served? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story.